Hello and welcome to completion day for our quilt. I'm so excited because by the end of today you will have all of the knowledge and hopefully start working on the skills to have your quilt completed. So let's get started and get on with it. While we were apart last time, I have done a couple of things and I need to explain the process to you. When we quilt a quilt, I started to show you how to quilt your quilt by just doing straight lines down the quilt with your regular sewing machine in your home. There are several ways you can do that though. You don't have to do it on your sewing machine. You can do it by hand, or you can take it to a long arm quilter, or I'm sure you've got lots of other ways you could do it. You could have someone help you and maybe be working on two sewing machines. I have never done that, but I've heard of people who have. But I have a couple of examples today to show you how we actually do the quilting. We're going to start out with what I did because I do have a long arm quilting machine. I have a Gamble, and we're going to start out with my process on what I do to get ready to quilt the quilt. The top and the batting and the back were all together. I had to select a really good color that would go nicely and that would not compete with the quilt. And I chose a color called Mother Goose because it's the same brown that's in a lot of the quilt that I'll show you in just a little bit. But this is a permacore product. It's a cotton product and it's great for quilting. But I wanted to show you it comes on cones like this so that you have lots and lots of thread. I do use this when I sew, sometimes too on my sewing machine. So it's good thread to both quilt with and to sew with. You can use it for both things. You don't need to get separate things. When I was just trying to decide what I was going to do or what I was going to quilt on my woody quilt that was 6 rows by 7 rows, I came up with a lot of designs that I liked, and there's a thought process that goes with it, so I'm going to share that thought process really quickly with you. If you recall, my quilt was pretty busy. The fabrics had squirrels, they had rabbits, they had trees, they had plaids, they had leaves. They had a lot of different things. They even had a couple of geometric designs, but it was pretty busy, and I didn't need a busy quilt pattern on that to compete with that at all. So as I went through my quilting patterns, I had some favorites that I turned to so that I decided what I was going to do. But the first thing that I did is I eliminated some. And as you can see right here, this is my elimination pile. And these patterns up here are the ones that I really thought would look nice as I was going to put it on my long arm. So let's just go through these. I selected them because this has diamonds on it. However, it also has circles, but it's sure cute, and I do like it. This one, I just like it. I like it a lot, and I've done it before on quilts, and I know that it would look nice. It might not be for this quilt, but I know that it would look nice. This one I loved because it looks like the trees on some of the fabric, and it would be really, really cute. This one has the diamonds and the double diamond the way that the fabric on the back of the quilt is, and so that would look really nice. The thing that's maybe not good about it is it gives me a feeling of being rather formal. It's more, and it's quite large. It's about a foot, 12 inches from here to here in the pattern. So it would kind of take over the quilt with its massiveness. I really like this one, and it matched the fabric on the back perfectly. And this was not as big a pattern as this was. So that was a true plus for me. I loved this one also, a little bit different. It was smaller in size than this one, so my quilt would have been tighter. And I wasn't sure that I wanted the quilting on my quilt to be tight. I wanted it kind of a medium tightness. And this one, just like a couple of the others that I've shown you before, I love it. I've used it a lot of times. I love it. And I could have used it on this and it would have been fine. But it wouldn't have been as good as the one that I chose, I think. So this one's out because it has circles. This one's out because it's cute but not cute enough. This one's out because I don't want to duplicate the trees. I want to do something different than the trees. This one is a little bit too formal and too large. This one is really good. This one is pretty good. And this one is out. So it's between these two, and I chose this one. The name of this is called Diagonal Plaid Bias Cut, and I have purchased it from Urban Elements for my machine. But it really seemed to be the perfect one for me, and I'm happy to share with you what it looks like now that I've done the quilting on my long arm on this quilt that's cute. So this is the unveiling of our quilt that's almost finished. Congratulations if you have reached this point. I meant to tell you that if you do send your quilt off to be quilted, excuse me, to a long arm quilter, you get to decide on the design, or you have your long arm quilter just help you decide on the design that will go on your quilt. When I first started quilting, I did not do the long arm quilting. I did it all by my machine, and that's how we've done our sample upstairs. So you can finish your quilt without all of this fancy stitching if you want. But let's unveil this pattern on this machine today. And it is so cute. I'm just thrilled with the way that this came out. This right here, you can see the pattern really, really well. The double diamond shape. And if this were quilting out on my quilting machine, it's what is called a continuous stitch. I'll start it kind of like right here. The machine would go here, 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 here. It just keeps going and going and going. So you've got a diagonal that it actually sews this pattern out, okay? And it goes pretty fast. This quilt took me, just to quilt, it took me 2 hours. I timed myself. Now that's not bad at all, okay? You could do the simple things that I've shown you and that I'm going to continue to show you. You can do the simple things on your own sewing machine at home. It will probably take you, I would say, longer, just because you've got bulk to deal with. But you can do it, and it would turn out very nice. So let's talk about the back of this. You can see the pattern really nicely on the back. The other thing I wanted to share with you is in last week's demonstration, I showed you that you had to make your backing, you had to seam your backing so that it would be wide enough. I'm sure you remember that. This is where that seam is, and you can see, you really can't, you don't notice that, okay? It's just part of the quilt, but anyway, it turned out really lovely. I'm very, very pleased with the end product. I'm sure you can tell that I'm not going to take this off of here and go and put it on my bed or anywhere else, because look at all this. This is all excess. I don't need all this here at all. What I do need is I need something to finish off these edges so that it looks nice and it looks finished. You need to frame your quilt. You need to finish it. And that process is called binding. And we're going to actually show you how to cut your binding today, and how to attach it, and how to sew it down, excuse me. What you need to know is I'm of the old school, and so I do my binding by hand. Lots of people do their binding totally by machine. What I'm going to show you is going to be by hand. And there are lots of YouTube videos and lots of different things that if you don't want to do it by hand, you can go and you can find a YouTube that will teach you really well how to do it totally by machine. But for our purposes, we are going to finish this quilt off by hand, okay? Let me just show you an example of a partial quilt that I'm talking about. This is a table runner, and as you can see, I finished it off with that tiny piece of binding so that there aren't any raw edges, and it looks completely finished. However, I have not finished the back completely. I'm still sewing that down by hand. But I wanted to show you that the reason that you do this is you cut it, you trim it, you make sure that everything's good to go. But that wouldn't be pretty in comparison. This raw edge, who wants to see raw edge with a bunch of batting hanging out? I don't think anyone does. So it's not complete until you really have put this binding on, and then you have a finished, beautiful product, one that will last for many, many years, and you will be very, very happy with. We're going to now go upstairs because that's where my sewing machine is, and we're going to do the binding procedure that I've told you about to finish the quilt. We're going to measure it, we're going to cut it, and then we're going to put it on the quilt, and I'll show you how you stitch it down. So you can do a lot of these things on your own, but I want to demonstrate for you how it's done correctly so that you will have a good product at the end. Also, just as a reminder, I need you to know how important you are coming into my home every week and sharing these experiences with me and learning and providing me a platform to teach and share some of the things that I really love. It's very joyful for me, and I appreciate it. So if you could just do the click on the like. Subscribing's even better if you would like to do that. And if you have questions, I'm more than open to helping you with your questions or your problems on your quilt, or even comments. Maybe you'd like to tell me what you like or dislike about this quilt, or how your quilt turned out. I would love to see what your product has been on some of these things that we've done together. So please share and include me in what's going on with your production of quilts. I would appreciate that very much. Now let's go upstairs. Here's the quilt sample that we started last time and that we have quilted. And remember, I told you that we start from the center and we work out when we quilt. I just followed the seam line with my sewing foot, and it's probably a little bit difficult for you to see how that looks. So I'll turn it around so that you can see a little bit better how that quilting turned out. It's not tight quilting. It's not elaborate or fancy quilting. It's functional quilting, and that's perfectly fine. This is going to be a table topper, like a tablecloth for a small table, and so this is great for that. We don't need anything elaborate. And this took me maybe, I'd say an hour and a half to just do straight lines. Like I said, I started in the center and always worked out from the center, and it's finished. It looks pretty good. It's finished except for it's got all of this batting that's still hanging out here. I have trimmed that, but now we need to put that finishing on it, which is called a binding. And I decided that I love this fabric on the back. I think it's really cute. It matches the front, I think, cute. The color's perfect, and it's got all the other colors. It's got white and green and even a little bit of pink, but that's okay. So I like this back, and I think it would be cute on the front. And so I'm going to show you how to make your your binding so that you can have a completed project. I've already told you that I'm going to use that fabric, and here it is. This is what I have left of this fabric, and I'm going to cut this fabric into strips of 2.5 inches each, and then I will connect those strips so that I have enough binding to go all the way around the quilt. Okay? Now, if you remember, this quilt sample is 4 squares by 4 squares, and each of those squares is 10 inches. So our quilt sample is 40 inches by 40 inches. So if we add 40 from the top perimeter, 40 down the side perimeter, 40 across the bottom perimeter, and 40 up the other side, that's 4 times 40, and that's 160 inches that we need to put the binding all the way around the quilt. So that's just a real simple math problem for you. However, that doesn't take into account that there might be some bulk. There might be an area that you will come across that will take a little bit more. So I always give myself about 10 extra inches to make sure that everything goes just fine. Yes, you'll have some left over. I understand that, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So let's make our binding 170 inches, okay, so that we're safe. So I'm going to fold my fabric, and I'm going to cut on the crosswise grain. This is the crosswise grain. If you notice, here are my 2 selvages. So you're folding selvage to selvage, and then you're folding again so that you can cut it evenly into 2.5 inch strips. Now, I just have a really small cutting turntable here and a small cutter. You can draw lines if you want with a ruler and cut it out by hand. I think it's a little bit tedious to do that, but you can do it, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up this fabric. I'm going to line up a side line here, and I'm going to line up a top line up here so that it's correctly angular. So you'll notice that this edge is kind of raw and rough. I don't like that. So I'm going to move it up just a little bit, and I'm going to cut off that raw edge so that we have a nice binding piece of fabric. We want it to be clean and nice. So what I have for my tools here are, I have a cutting ruler. I have a nice cutting tool. You'll notice that that cutting tool is kind of large, and it's also very sharp. So just be really careful with that. But I've got this here. I'm going to cut across here using my ruler as my guide. So I'll just cut this. There, I used a little bit more pressure that time. My blade could be getting a little bit dull. There, and you'll notice that that's a nice edge. It's nice and clean. Now I'm going to move down here, and I'm going to move this up so that it's aligned again really nicely. And I'm going to count down 2.5 inches. 1, 2, and that's 2.5 inches right there. However, I might be off just a little bit. You never know. So the best way to do it isn't just by doing it off of your mat. The best way to do it is to use your ruler. And if you look at this ruler, here's a 1/2 inch space, here's an inch, and here's an inch. So what I can do is I can turn that to the 2.5 inch mark and lay it right along like I did before. Lay your lines up. Edge at the top is right lined up with that, and my side is right lined up with that. And I'm going to turn this just a little bit so that I actually can cut it with my right hand because I'm right-handed. You want to hold your ruler down with one hand while you cut with the other hand. You might get a couple of little slivers that don't get cut, so you just cut them or tear them. Don't use this part, okay?
What do you mean?
So, you have a consistent 2.5 inch strip of fabric. I've told you before, and you'll hear it from me several times, but what you need to make sure of is that you do not include the selvage in your strip. You don't sew it into a seam, you don't do anything with it, you want it out. So it's going out. I'm cutting it off as I begin. This fabric going across is 42 inches. So what I need to do here is I need to make at least 4 cuts, 4 nice strips of fabric, because 4 times 42 is 168. And that should do us for all the way around our quilt. So I'm going to make 3 other cuts. And if you don't feel like that's good enough, that you want a little bit more, it never hurts to cut a little bit more. It's better than having to go back and cut later. So there, I've lined it up again on both sides. That's 2.5 inches. Nice cut that time. Cut off your selvage. And I've got 2 more of those same cuts to do. See the alignment? Aligned across the top, aligned down the side. I need to use a little bit more muscle to make sure that those cuts go all the way through. Get rid of your selvage. Three. Here comes our last one. Okay, we have our 4 strips ready to go. All we're going to do to make sure that these strips are together the way that they should be, is we're just going to join them with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to do that, and we're going to make one long continuous strip. I'm ready to sew, and here we go. We're making our binding now. You've cut the binding. I have a straight stitch on my sewing machine. I have on a walking foot because this is going to get bulky and I don't want to have to change my foot again, so I just left my walking foot on. But I do have a straight stitch. I'm joining those strips together. Remember, I have a tail that comes off so that my stitching doesn't come undone. Now I'll get the next strip ready. Put right sides together. Right sides of your fabric together. Wrong sides are on the outside because you're sewing a seam. Make sure that your fabrics match up really nicely, like that. I'm not using any pins because it's a really short piece of fabric. I ought to be able to handle a seam for that long. Go off the fabric. Cut your thread. Then the last one. Same process. Line up your two at the top. Put your right sides together. You're sewing the top to the top, and the outside layer of your fabric is the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm making a 1/4 inch seam with a straight stitch. And going off the fabric with a tail. So I have a lot of binding. I have enough to go all the way around my sample quilt. But how do I do that? What do I do to make it look really nice? That's our next step. So here we go. We need to iron this so that it is going to be, first thing we're going to do is we're going to iron the seams open. This one doesn't want to open. We're going to iron all of our seams open because that reduces the bulk. Okay? And that's still not open. There. That reduces the bulk. Then we're going to fold this in half and have those two raw edges together so that we can sew a binding that has a fold on it. This will be the edge that we sew. This will be the edge that will be the finished edge, which is the folded edge of the binding. So the first thing we need to do is we do need to open up all of our seams. And I'm going to my iron to do that. Here we are with my handy dandy iron and ironing board, and we're going to press these seams open. When I say press, though, remember we're not going to do anything, only lay the iron down, give it a short burst of steam, or if you want to, give it a short burst of spray. But we don't want to do a swishing motion because we don't want to distort our fabric. It's really important that we leave the fabric as it is. If this were terribly wrinkled, I might do some pressing, but as it is, it's not. I'm opening that seam again by just laying that on there and holding it for a minute so that it stays in place. Let me repeat again why we're opening these seams. You're going to have bulk if you don't open your seams up on this. And you don't want bulk. It will make your binding look bulky and bumpy. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We have all of our pieces now together. And as I told you before, what we're going to do is we're going to fold, we're going to fold the edges of this with the fabric being on the outside this time. So your piece that was 2.5 inches will now become 1 1/4 inches, and it will have a nice fold, a nice smooth fold that's the finishing part of your quilt. This is the raw edge right here. You can see the little fibers that are sticking up. This is the folded edge. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to press all of the raw edges, and as much as possible, if you can, just use light pressure. Bring those raw edges together and make sure they're even, because when you go to sew it on the quilt, what you want is you want that to be even. You don't want to just catch one of those edges. You want to catch 2 of those edges. So that's pretty important. So let me show you my work so far. You should see 1 raw edge. Can you see that? And then you should see 1 folded edge. Now I'm coming to a seam. Remember, my seam is open, so make sure that when you press this down like that, that seam stays open when you press the 2 sides together. And sometimes what you have to do for that to happen is you have to hold it just a little bit extra so that it does what you want it to do. But all of this, you're manipulating your fabric and everything with your fingers. You don't need any pins. If you feel better with pins or clips, you certainly can use them, but you don't need to. And that's the way we do the rest of this. I'm going to not bother you with my ironing talent. I'm going to come back to you and show you how we attach this now to our quilt. So I'll see you in a minute. Here we have our quilt, and it's ready to be bound. I have all of the binding ready to go, and this will be fun and easy. This is the top of my quilt. I'm holding that there. This is the side of my quilt. When you attach your binding, it's really kind of important where you start to attach your binding, because you don't want the start and the end to show up as much as other places in the binding go. So what I do is I will typically go a ways down from the top, and I'll be on the side of my quilt on the front. You're working from the front. You're going to attach your binding to the front. So I have some pins here. I am attaching my binding raw edge to the quilt raw edge, and I'm lining it up really nicely, and I am going to use pins because I want it to stay in place for me. I don't want it going its own way. So I'm going to do that, maybe about every 3 or 4 inches. There's only going to be one problem, and that problem is going to be when I sew it, I've got to remember to take those out. But I'm just running that right along that raw edge. Like that. Now, I am coming to a corner, which is an interesting situation because brand new quilters don't quite know what to do when they get to the corner. Some quilters think they can just cut it off and start all over again. That isn't what I would do, but there is an easy solution that can help you a lot so you don't have to do what's called a mitered corner. A mitered corner, we'll go over at a different time, but today I'm just going to round this corner right here. I'm going to round it like that. I'll draw it out so that you can see. And then every corner that I come to will have a mild rounded corner instead of a straight edge corner. And that makes it so that I don't have to do a bunch of turning and flipping and doing a mitered corner. So I'm going to take this lovely cutting instrument, bring this over, and ever so slightly I'm going to just round that. You can see how that's just barely just rounded very slightly. It's no longer square. Okay? Typically, if you're not used to using one of these cutters, my suggestion to you would be that you use scissors to do this. So now I'm going to bring it down further. And keep going all the way with those raw edges. When you come to that curved corner, you're going to need to use a little bit more pins to hold it into place to keep the raw edges together. And when you sew it, you want to make sure that you don't have a bunch of puckers and funny little bubbles here. So you'll need to work with your thumb and your finger and your pins as you go to make sure that you don't have a bunch of excess bulk. This turn or this corner is just ever so slight, so we shouldn't have a lot of problems. But do make sure that they're lined up, otherwise you will have a bit of a problem when it comes to the sewing. And that takes excess pins. And as you can see, this wants to do its own thing. There. Thank you for complying. Okay, that's pretty good. I feel pretty good about that. Now I'll go down this way. And I typically will do one edge at a time and make sure that everything is good with that, because if it's not good with that and you have to unpick, sometimes you have to unpick way more than you want to if you've done the whole thing. So I do it about a fourth at a time, then I go back and do a check on it. And once I've done a check on it, then I move on. You'll notice on the very top right here that I didn't begin at the top. The reason I didn't begin at the top is because I'm not going to be sewing here. I'm going to need a little bit here to join with the part that comes around and joins up here. So actually I'm moving this pin down just a little bit because you're going to need about 3 or 4 inches on both sides to join your seam when it comes to here. Okay, and what we'll do is we will open this up and we'll hold this to the fabric that comes here, and we'll sew a seam so that you don't have any open or incomplete spaces. But for right now, let me just go ahead and show you how to sew this on. We're using a 1/4 inch seam. I'm using a straight stitch, and I'm using my walking foot because there's quite a bit of bulk here. Here we go. It's a race for the bias tape. You Keep your foot traveling right along that edge so that you have a nice 1/4 inch seam. Coming to pins, so I need to be really careful. Some of these pins, I'm going to substitute my finger so that it's going to ride along there pretty well. In fact, I just left some pins in. I shouldn't be doing that, but I did, so forgive me this time. I'm coming to that pin where I'm going to end and not sew anything. In fact, I don't think I'm going to go any, well, I'll take a couple of stitches and then a back stitch. Okay, but I need that, at least that long of a tail to be able to join to the other piece of fabric when I get to it. And it looks like to me we have a little bit of a problem that started clear back here. And that is our bobbin thread wasn't working. So we'll just work with this amount right here and I'll show you what we've got. At least it will give you an idea. And then I'll move on to a different piece so that you can see what's going on. We have sewn around, we started here, we sewed over to our corner. Okay, our corner does have a couple of little pleats, but that's fine. It will look just fine. We'll be able to work with those. And we've sewn to here. I actually sewed further, but I'm just going to show you with this, and then I'll show you how to tack this down with a sewing needle, with a hand sewing needle. So what you're really going to do is you're going to finish this edge, finish this raw part, and you're turning it to the back so that you can sew that down by hand. And you want this to be pretty much the same all the way around. Okay, and the one way you can do that is you can go to your iron and you can press this down so that it all looks nice and even. It's also easier to sew if you've got that. Here's the sewing line. I don't know if you can see that sewing line or not from the other side, but there's the sewing line. And what you're going to do is try to match that sewing line up with that nice folded edge. And that's where that sewing will be, but it will all be by hand. It will not be by machine. Once you get all of your bias onto your quilt, then you have to sew it down so that that raw edge is completely finished, and you try as much as possible to have your stitching be invisible so that people aren't looking at anything, only perfection. So let's iron this down, and then I will show you with a different project how you go ahead and you stitch it down, and I'll show you something that's really quite exciting to me. So let's go to the iron. Here we have our very small example of our bias binding. I'm flipping that nice folded edge over onto the back and lining up that folded edge with the sewing line from the front. And I am using pressure, not a lot of movement of the fabric, but I am using pressure. Now it's not going to stay down because it has nothing to secure it. but that's what it looks like on the back. This is what it looks like on the front. It's lovely. It really looks great. Then when you get into these corners, you can use the point of your iron to kind of flatten that out. You'll do the exact same thing. You'll turn it. If you have a little bit of bulk from your batting that shows up, you can always take scissors and cut that batting back just a little bit, but this has worked out pretty well. So this is what the finished product will look like as you complete the other side by hand. And when the other side by hand has been all done, your quilt is ready to either lay under or give as a gift or just sit and enjoy for a little bit. But that's how it will look. I usually press from both the front and the back just to kind of make sure that it's even. I also look to make sure that I haven't missed any stitches. I was really careful when I was sewing, so I'm pretty sure I didn't miss any stitches at all. And that corner is just barely rounded and looks really quite nice. I'll give it a shot of steam. Okay, so that's how you attach the binding to your quilt. Now we're going to sew it down by hand. And I have a special surprise for you with something that's already mostly done, but the sewing on the back I'm just completing. But I wanted to share a project with you where I'm just finishing off the binding to something that I've been working on for about 6 months. So let's go see what that is. This is a very special project of mine that I've been working on quite a while. This used to be a beautiful quilt, a log cabin quilt. However, it didn't match with my furniture. It didn't match with my likes and dislikes in what I decorated with. And so I decided that I was going to make myself a really lovely coat, and a coat with a hood. Here's what that looks like. Here's the hood. But you will notice that this has just a ton of binding. It's bound all the way around the coat by hand. And if we look on the inside of the coat, I have even bound all these. This is binding right here. This is binding in the hood. I wanted to bind all of the seams inside the quilt, and so I have done all that by hand too. The reason I'm showing you this is because it is a good example of, another example of binding. Lots of binding is on clothing. Lots of binding is on a number of different things. But this is something that I have bound, and it is bound exactly the way the quilt was that I was showing you. This is where my stitching ends by hand that I've done so far. I have this pinned down coming around this curve, and I'm happy with how that looks, but you'll notice this is the tail that I talked about that has to join up with the other tail from the other end of my coat. So I want to show you how you do this hand stitching here, and I need to go get my needle and thread so that I can do that for you. It's kind of a fun thing. It actually is a tailoring, I would say it's a tailoring stitch that if you take tailoring in a class in high school or whatever, you would learn this stitch. But we do this stitch when we bind by hand with a quilt. So let me go get my quilting tools and my binding tools, and I'll be right back to show you how to do it. We have a change in plans. We've decided to do the green example quilt to show you. We won't be doing a lot of hand stitching down, but we will be doing enough that you'll be able to catch what's going on. And I have put on my handy dandy glasses so that I can see what I'm doing. But here we go. So here's your raw edge on the front. You're flipping this fabric over and you're going to be sewing right here. Okay? I have my needle and thread. I have a single strand of thread with a knot on the end. You want to have something that secures it. Whether or not it's a knot or you take a number of stitches, you need to secure it. So I'm going into the fabric here at the raw edge area with that knot, and it's holding, so that's good. I'm going to turn my fabric over like that, and you'll notice something about it. I call this edge that is folded the tunnel. You're going to be taking your thread and needle through the tunnel, and you won't be able to see that because it's in the tunnel. You're going through the tunnel and you'll see it come out, and then you're going to just catch a little teeny stitch on the back of the quilt. So you're joining this piece of fabric and this piece of fabric. Okay, then I'm going to go back into the tunnel, and it's probably better if you hold it like this so you can see your tunnel. You go through the tunnel, and you shouldn't be taking extra long stitches. You should be taking probably at least 1/4 of an inch on your stitches. But if you're going through the tunnel, you can hold this or you can clip it. There's my tunnel again. I need to come down, take a little short stitch, not all the way through your fabric, just through the backing of your fabric. Now I'm going back into the tunnel. And if you want, so you can see that a little bit better, I've gone up more near the, can you see how my needle is in the tunnel? Okay, that shows you where it went in, it shows you how it came out. So it's in the tunnel, it's coming out of the tunnel, and you're going to do a little teeny stitch right there. Once you get some muscle memory on this, this is perfectly easy and it goes really quite fast. But what you can see is you're not seeing a bunch of stitches. This is all very nicely finished off. If you look at that closely, you're not seeing a lot of stitches. Every once in a while you'll catch one, but for the most part you're not going to see those stitches because a lot of the stitches are in the tunnel, and that teeny stitch that comes down to grab is underneath most of the time, so you won't see it. So once you get the motion of that and you get the procedure, just say to yourself, tunnel, down stitch, back to the tunnel, down stitch, into the tunnel, teeny stitch, back into the tunnel, teeny stitch, into the tunnel, teeny stitch. My suggestion to you, if you've never done this before, you'll also notice that on the front you will not see any stitching whatsoever from those stitches. All of your stitches will be on the back of your quilt, not on the front. Okay, so let's do it again. Go through the tunnel, little teeny stitch. Come up, pull your thread through, take your needle, go through the tunnel, little teeny stitch, pull your needle through. And you'll notice there is a thread here, but it's not from my stitching right now. But you'll notice how clean that is. That is a very, very clean job, and it's a decent job. I'm happy with it. Okay, my thread is in the tunnel. I come down and take a little bite of a stitch and go back up through that tunnel. This is very, very secure, okay, because your thread is buried in that tunnel and the stitches are taken up into that for security and for strength. So, and that's how easy it is. Pretty good job. Just practice and talk to yourself and just say, tunnel, stitch, pull my needle. Tunnel, stitch, pull my needle. And you will have complete success with this, I can promise. Okay, this is regular sewing thread that I'm using. This is a small needle with just an average eye to it. But I'm not using anything special. It's just sewing thread and a sewing needle. And there you have it. Even though that's a tiny, tiny area, look at the front of that quilt. Is that not lovely and beautiful and perfect? It really is. And I can assure you that your product will look every bit, if not better, than mine. Tunnel, stitch, pull your thread and needle through. Lovely, just perfect. I wish you success in this. Make sure that you can see what you're doing. Make sure that you can see what you're doing. And that you have good light when you're doing this, because this is really kind of small work. But I love to do binding when I'm sitting in front of the TV at night, or when I just need a rest from the day, I'll sit down and do something with my binding. So anyway, I wish you all the good luck on this, and I would appreciate it if when you finish your project, if you have made one with me, that you share it. Tell me what things you found successful and what things you would do differently. And I'll modify my next presentations to try to make things easier and better for each of you. I just enjoy this time with you so much, and have a great week. And I've got some wonderful projects coming up that are super easy and super fun. So make sure you're there to learn about them. So if you can make sure that you like our new channel and subscribe to it, that would help us out in our continued efforts to bring you fun and exciting and very artsy craftsy kinds of things to do. Have a great week. Enjoy yourself.